This week's parsha deals with the laws of leprosy. Leprosy was a very strange type of a malady. Manifested itself in various different types of boils and lesions on one's skin, clothes and home. And it all came about as a consequence of an individual speaking ill of another person, known as Lashon Hara. It was functional in that when a person was declared to be a leper, it reminded him, it caused and demanded from him a certain introspection, revisiting of his actions, awareness of self, and understanding and appreciating how he brought this upon himself, and thereby hopefully would solicit a sense of remorse and regret that we call tshuva, that would ensure that the person wouldn't speak Lashon Hara, speak ill of another individual again. The punishment for the leper is that he has to go outside of all the camps. Within the Jewish community in those days, you had 3 encampment areas. The one was known as Machane Shechina, the Divine Presence's camp, and that was the camp wherein the tabernacle rested. Immediately encircling that was Machane Leviah, the camp of Leviim, which included the Kohanim and the Leviim would live in that particular area. And beyond that camp, you had Machane Yisrael, which was the camp for the regular average Jew who is neither Kohen nor Levi. The leper determined that he was indeed a leper, that he had to go outside all the camps. So if he was a Levi, he couldn't simply go and camp himself out in the Yisrael, in the other section. And if he was in Yisrael, he couldn't encamp himself in the Levi section. They all had to go outside of all the encampment areas. And outside of the encampment areas itself, they were not allowed to mingle and to interact with other people who themselves were decreed to be lepers and separated. So whilst they were impure and sharing a similar impurity to other individuals, solitary confinement was mandated for at least a week. And then they would have to reassess and to see whether or not this particular lesion has disappeared. Our rabbis explain that there's a very simple reason, that God's way of dealing with the concept of reward and punishment of schar v'onesh is what we would call a quid pro quo, or in the expression of the Talmud, midah keneged midah. There's always a direct correlation between the sin and the penalty that it required. In this case, since the individual, through speaking ill of another person, has either created a rift between a husband and a wife, or he's created a rift between one person and another, because when you hear something bad about an individual, inherently it makes you avoid that person. You want to disassociate from that individual. And you can really isolate a person by simply speaking Lashon Hara about him. So through speaking Lashon Hara, this individual caused another person to be isolated. And therefore the punishment has to meet the crime. And just as he caused a total separation of this individual, a total isolation of this individual, therefore it only behoves God that the retribution and the punishment, as I said, should be midah keneged midah, quid pro quo. The person who spoke Lashon Hara gets exorcised from the rest of the community. He has to sit outside where nobody else is, not even people who shared his iniquity and shared his punishment. Each individual had to be in their own secluded and isolated area of tzoras. It was the punishment. Chazal, our sages, tell us in the Talmud of Nedarim, they tell us that there's certain individuals who, albeit that they are breathing, talking, walking, etc., nevertheless the rabbis viewed their existence as a non-existence. And that non-existence is articulated as chashuv k'met. He's considered as if he is dead. And even though from a biological point of view the person is certainly alive and breathing and kicking and talking, etc., from a deeper level, from a meaningful level, he might be alive but he's not living. He's considered dead. And one of those individuals, the Talmud tells us, is a Metzora, a leper. A leper is chashuv kamet, he's considered as if he is dead. The question is why? He seems to be totally capable of leading a normal life, albeit in isolation. There are many concepts of impurity that exist, not so much today, but we do not view the individual who is besieged by that impurity as being an individual who is considered dead. An individual, for example, as ourselves, who unfortunately we've come into contact with dead people, we've been to a cemetery, we're impure. And a level of impurity that until Mashiach comes we can never extricate ourselves from. Nowhere does it say that we're chashuv kamet, that we're considered dead. It's only the leper, with his impurity, that he is considered to be chashuv kamet, as if he is dead. And I think the reason is a very profound one, and perhaps a very timely one as well. The reason the leper is considered dead is because of that total, unbridled isolation that he experiences. As I said, he can't mix even with people who are on the same spiritual level, contaminated by the same spiritual plague. They can't sit together. It's not like a prison where all criminals are equal, so to speak. All lepers are equal. No. Each leper has to be by himself. And the function of that is to give him pause for thought. And the idea of isolation itself is a chashuv kamet entity. It's an entity which is analogous to death. What do I mean? By virtue of the fact that this leper had to be totally isolated and sanitized from any human interaction whatsoever, by the virtue of that, he is considered as if he is dead. And the reason is that we each as individuals have to appreciate that we do not live in isolation. We do not live lives for me, for our own selves. We have to live lives that impact and influence and influence other people's lives. And if all we're concerned about the I is me, then chashuv kamet. Then our rabbis tell us that is tantamount to already not existing, to already being dead. The leper, who is totally isolated from any other human interaction, who has no other human responsibility, no shared duty to a fellow person because he is in total isolation, chashuv kamet. And many people today, we have to ask ourselves, whilst we don't have the actual malady and disease of leprosy, we have to ask ourselves, are we chashuv kamet? Are we perhaps analogous in some way to the leper? Do we live totally self-centered and egocentric lives, not concerned for the welfare of other individuals, not trying to see if we can help other people, what impact we can make on other people's lives? Those are very seminal questions that we have to ask of ourselves. Life is for living, and living is for giving. The only way we can be considered as true living entities is when we are giving to others, when we are contributing to our friends, our society, and our community. And therefore we have to make sure that we don't become self-imposed Metzoraim, self-imposed lepers, by segregating ourselves from a community, from our people, by separating ourselves from a duty and a responsibility to our fellow. And with that, I'd like to end off with this following message. We're coming up to Pesach. Pesach, as we all know, is a highly expensive time of the year. Traditionally, the Shulchan Aruch dictates that we talk about ma'ot chitim, calling for funds to assist, to ensure that the less privileged in a society, the less privileged in our community, are also able to celebrate Pesach with wine, and with matzahs, and with meat, and with fish, and so on and so forth. And therefore, traditionally, the rabbi would always stand up and make a plea for anybody to please assist financially so that all the people in the community could be able to have a Pesach the likes of which we all would like to have. And therefore I ask at this point in time, I make that traditional plea of ma'ot chitim, of money for Pesach needs and Pesach goods. You can call the office if you need details. You know that I don't usually ask for money, but here I think we have a duty and an obligation, and specifically in reference to this week's parasha. I think we all have to bear in mind that if we want to truly live, we have to give. And if we want to truly be able to celebrate Pesach, we have to be certain that everybody is celebrating Pesach. So I end off with this last and final request to please help out with Ma'ot Chitim, with money to assist the less privileged in our community. I thank you, and may we not only be blessed with life, but may we take that life and give it the gift of living as well. Good Shabbos.